Hey everyone, I'm Jay.
I'm Fish Sticks.
And I'm Sophia, and welcome to Witches Betwixt.
Today on Witches Betwixt, we have Dave Smith, author of Quantum Sorcery, The Science of Chaos Magic, and author of Voidworking, Practical Sorcery from Primordial Nothingness. Dave Smith's been around for a long time. He's been a part of the chaos magic movement for a long time, and he has a great grasp of history. He has a wonderful paradigm based on what we understand of quantum physics and science. And he is a personal friend of mine, and I am a massive fan of his books. So here's Dave.
Ew.
I think.
I don't shut the fuck up about your books, bro.
Talk about.
I'm open.
I kind of do want to talk about the books and generally segue into conversations that spin off of that, because, like, as an author, I do want to give Dave, like, that kind of space and shout out, because, like, it takes so much time and effort to write a book, and it's such a fucking hassle to get people to even know about it, right? And like, I was looking at bookstore names the other day when I was in Chapters, and I could recognize a few of them.
There is a local New Age bookstore, very New Agey, and they have a local authors shelf. So I had to get in there to buy I needed a stellated stone for the evocation of the White Queen, because I wanted to have the 0 value for the bit and the 1 value for the bit, like in Tron. The octahedron is the yes, and the stellated shape is the no. So I had to go there. And so I asked them, who do I need to talk about? Who do I need to talk to about getting my book carried here? I have, a local author. I've written 2 books. And they gave me a name and number, and I called them the next day, and she asked, who I was and, what I wanted. And I told her, hey, my name is Dave Smith. I've written a couple of books, Quantum Sorcery, Voidworking. I'm a local author. I'd like to place my books in your shop. She goes, I'm a little bit busy right now. Let me call you back. Like, okay. That was like 2 weeks ago. So I think that she Googled me and said, oh, God, we don't want his stuff in our tiny little New Age
dirty
shop.
chaos magicians.
Yeah.
God, those New Agers really have a fucking problem with coyote. They really do. Like, I don't know why. They don't get what we're about.
Yeah,
well, they like to make a lot of rules, and we don't like to follow a lot of those.
No, we don't.
We like to break them.
I think a part of it ties into the misconception of the name chaos, which is like misused because a lot of it is chaos magic, which is like invocation of, the primordial nothing. Instead of like chaos, which is very different in nature, and I think because of that we get a bad rep because people don't actually want to do the investigation.
Well, I think part of that's intentional. I think when Pete Carroll and Ray Sherwin were putting together, what they did, they wanted to kind of seem edgy. They were the edgy alternative to the OTO or the Golden Dawn or any of the other working groups in the UK in the early 70s. So they wanted something a little edgy. So I think that was not unintentional.
It wasn't, and unfortunately, like nowadays, like back in the day, it had that effect. Like the chaos magic movement was a hardcore underground fucking thing. Yeah. And it was something that, and this is the wonder of chaos magic is a thing, because I feel like I came into it just as that wonder stopped becoming a thing and it became super popular. But I mean, I know that they were saying chaos magic is dead, like what, in the early 90s, like chaos magic's dead, and then the Z cluster came around, and it's still up until about 10 years ago. Up until about 10 years ago, chaos magic was never your first paradigm. You always came from something else. You were a ceremonialist, you were Wiccan, you were a neo-pagan, you were a Thelemite, something. And then you broke something and you went, whoa, it worked anyway. How the fuck did this work? Or, you came across like one of the little mimetic breadcrumbs that people would get thrown out, like I did. And like I got caught in the breadcrumbs really hard. I even know which coyote did it. Like, and you came across it and it was like a mind blow.
I encountered my first chaos magician when I was at Weird House. At the time, I was a kind of a generic Wiccan, Scott Cunningham, Ed Fitch kind of Wiccan. And there was this guy, and he was always wearing the black leather jacket and had this kind of brooding aura about him. Nice. And he was always sitting they had a library there, and he was always sitting over in the corner reading this, Liber Null book. And it's like, oh, he's one of those dangerous chaos magicians. I've been told about them. And it's like,
your mom warned you about them.
Yeah. It's
Oh,
like,
no.
who knows?
And then you're like, hey, bud, how you doing? It's like you accidentally ran into John Constantine or some shit. You're like, hey, bud, how you doing?
Yeah.
It's funny,
Yeah,
dude. Me and you have a similar background, because that's like Wicca is how I kind of got into magic and the occult as well.
Oh, I started out Wiccan. I was introduced to Asatru by someone else who had kind of made the transition from kind of generic Wicca to more of an Anglo-Saxon Wicca, and then to Asatru. I even tried Gnosticism in the late 90s, and I was just always looking for a paradigm, looking for a path that spoke some kind of truth to me, and I just couldn't find one. And I joked one time, it's like, well, I've tried all of these things and none of them seem true. So I guess what's left is I guess I have to call myself a chaos magician now. And, that was kind of the joke. And then, starting around 2004, I started more, serious investigation, reading, Peter Carroll and Phil Hine and Jack Hawkins. And then I discovered the Tribe of the Fifth Aeon. It was a message board that Dead Jellyfish used to run on chaosmagic.com back in the 2004 to 2007, I think. And it was a pretty active community. I started writing on there a lot and interacting with a lot of people. And that was a really great board. There's been an attempt to resurrect it, but it didn't really come to anything.
Yeah, that board was there was the board on chaosmagic.com, and then there was occult forums, and it seems like those were the two places where a bunch of chaotes kind of congregated. And you mentioned Jack Hawkins. I actually want to point out Jack Hawkins wrote the foreword to Quantum Sorcery. That is a fucking feather in your cap, bro.
Thank you.
That's a big damn deal.
Well, she was supposed to speak at, I went to an event in 2004 called Ancient Ways up in Chicago, and that's actually where I got the idea for Quantum Sorcery, was in my hotel room on edibles and alcohol that night.
Yeah.
But Jack was supposed to come and speak, but she couldn't because of a problem with her passport. She was a dual citizen, US-UK, and she was unable to come and give the talk. So Andrea Vitimus ended up stepping in and filling the slots that she was slated to speak for. And I ended up, I wrote her, and I told her that I was sad to have missed her, and I really enjoyed her work. And I come to find out that before I moved to Indianapolis, she actually lived in Indianapolis for a while.
Oh wow!
And it's funny. We started writing one another, and she talked about missing instant pudding. There's apparently no instant pudding in the UK.
What?
Still, to this day, there isn't.
Really?
Tragedy.
I went and bought 12 boxes of chocolate and 12 boxes of butterscotch, put them in a box, and shipped them to her.
You're a true friend.
And she shipped me back a box of all kinds of UK sweets and cookies and treats and stuff. And when it came time to get the forward for Quantum Sorcery, Taylor Elwood helped me with the second edition, which is the one where she did the forward for originally. And we were talking, and I said, well, hey, I kind of know Jack Hawkins. Do you want to see if she would do it? And so he reached out to her, and yeah, she was all about it. I was really thrilled.
Kidding. It's a great forward, though. It is. Every time I read it, I'm just like, holy shit. We should do a little spot on Jack Hawkins at some point. I think that
she's amazing. I mean,
she is.
Now y'all are making me regret skipping most book forwards that I ever see. I'm like,
So
forward, introduction, whoosh.
So Jack Hawkins, her first book that she ever wrote was called Understanding Chaos Magic, and it was in the mid 90s. And it was really it was part of the reason that chaos magic has become not really a household name, because it isn't, obviously. Most magic is not a household name, but it is something that is known among more magicians than simply the ones that practice it. Like, that was her first book. Like, that was her jump off the ledge book. And it was good. It was very good. So she is a part of your history, part of our history. So
Yeah, absolutely.
also the historical layout that you provide, Dave, is pretty amazing too. Like, explaining how the moniker Chaos Magic kind of came about. Um and
Well,
the coffee house club and all the other things. Like it's
yeah, it's a fascinating history, and I wish that more people knew more of their history. That I'm old. I'm a Gen Xer, and you know, I'm always interested in the history of things, of how we got to where we are today. Who did what, and who were the movers and the shakers, and why do we do the things that we do? Who injected that into the current? That's just always fascinated me.
same.
You know, when I think about it, I haven't seen too many history of magic books. Like I do know there's the History of Magic by Eliphas Levi, but that's like French like Renaissance period, I want to say, or like there's a certain time period it's from when like people were doing a whole bunch of occultism back then. And I feel like we could really stand to benefit from someone writing a modern history of modern culture and chaos magic.
It's interesting because so much of chaos magic doesn't actually come from magic. It comes from books on physics. It comes from books on narrative and mythology and literature.
And
It comes from
mysticism.
books on psychology. It comes from a lot of places. Really, a lot of our historical beginnings are with, um, as far as our discipline. And Dave can really correct me on this and drag me if you need to. But it started with Austin Osman Spar. And really, but it started with Crowley as well, because it was all based on Crowley's, statement, magic is a science and the art of causing change to occur through conformity with will. That was a big game changer for early magicians, at least early in this context, around Crowley's time.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see how Crowley and Spare, interacted. Crowley thought, hey, here's, another feather in my cap. Here's another, pseudo famous person that I can, take in under my wing and say is my apprentice or whatever. And Spare just really wasn't having it.
There's a meme out there of it's the two people sitting at the table, and one of them puts a plate in front of the other, and the one putting the plate in front is Crowley, and the person who's getting the plate is Spar, and then he yeets it across the room, and it's just ceremonial magic. Yeet. It's like, nope,
Yeah.
fuck you. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to see the spread though, because like one of the things that a lot of folks forget about is that the beatniks also had a big part in what we now call chaos magic, specifically. And I know that he wouldn't have called himself a beatnik, but William Burroughs,
Oh, yeah.
specifically William Burroughs. He's part
William
of the
Burroughs,
reason.
Brian Geisen too. The two of them did a lot of work together.
Yeah, they did, and they're part of the reason that we know cut-ups. They're part of the reason that we know playbacks. Sigil magic.
You have got to explain what those are to us.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot
I've heard
of
you use those
buzzwords
terms several times now.
So cut-ups and cut-ups are interesting because you can use cut-ups in a lot of different contexts. But cut-ups are when you take a piece of writing or a coherent piece of writing and then you cut it up and rearrange it to create a new text. It's something that it started with William Burroughs, but it also started with the Dadaists, the absurdists, the early absurdists, like think the 20s or the 30s. And then it was adopted by Burroughs, who then taught it to a bunch of other folks.
Like Le Fautin, that for those who aren't aware of the art world, there's like this one thing, and I actually got to see the piece. It's someone took a urinal and like signed it, and it's like a really famous absurd piece of art that you'll see in art galleries alongside like Picasso or Manet is another one I've actually seen. Yeah.
So Brian Geisen is the person that kind of picked up on cut-ups and decided to start using them for something. He adopted them from like Dadaist work from years before, but he introduced it to Burroughs, and then I want to say that Burroughs introduced it to all of his beatnik friends. And then it's a weird ass pedigree because Burroughs didn't just teach it to folks at the Beat Hotel. He taught it to fucking David Bowie. He taught it to a bunch of, songwriters, a bunch of lyricists, a bunch of musicians who ended up using it. And
really, I had no fucking idea.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's kind of crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, there are apps on the web where you can paste a piece of text and hit the cut up button, and it will take the sentences and randomly reassemble them for you.
Which is incredible. Like, it's actually super useful. Think of it a lot like we use Big Toe in DKMU. It's very similar to Big Toe. And a lot of it is kind of Big Toe. It's its own kind of, and they're related to the same thing. They come from the Dadaist absurdist movement. So playbacks are interesting. I really wish that more modern coyotes used playbacks because it's amazing. If you've ever heard of speech jamming, it's sort of like the magical equivalent of speech jamming. So you take
Never heard
a
of
tape
speech
recorder. Jamming. Speech jamming is when you get a little bit of a lag. You ever get a little bit of a lag on a phone call where you can hear yourself and it's only a couple of seconds after what you just said?
Oh yeah, like
and
the
you
echo.
Can't talk.
Yeah.
That's speech jamming.
Ah, okay.
So this wasn't developed by Burroughs, although it was developed by Burroughs, and it was picked up by a bunch of different folks. So, like, this is stuff that you would see Topi using. So think Genesis Portage.
Yes.
This is stuff that Phil Hine picked up and talked about in his books. Dave Lee, a couple of other folks like that. It's been used in some crazy places. If I remember correctly, there was a thing about playbacks being used against like the little budding groups of Scientology in London because they were fucking offensive.
Yeah, that's what Burroughs went after. He walked around with a portable reel-to-reel unit and recorded all sorts of discordant sounds and went and just changed the soundscape of their vicinity, and it really caused an effect.
Yeah, and that's what you do. You just record a bunch of nasty things. Like, you either record something from the target location and then you warp it in some way. You play it more slowly, or you add more acid to it, or you take explosions or pigs screaming or some other thing, and you play it really lowly in a place that has a decent acoustic. So it will has really not decent acoustic, bad acoustics, where it will echo a lot. There's no dampening at all. And you don't play it loudly enough that people realize what you're doing, but you play it loudly enough that they still hear it. And it just makes shit bad and makes shit weird in the place that you're doing it. It's impressive. I have not used it but a few times, but
I just thought of this wild idea. Like, I could do like you were saying, like, just sounds, right? Like the sounds of the city, right? Just like recording the sounds of the city and then like fucking with those sounds. And then I was thinking, like in Philly in particular, at our city hall, there's this like courtyard with this compass in the middle of the ground. And it is just like the acoustics in that area. Like, so if you had a good enough speaker, you could do some cool stuff there with that kind of tech.
And the crazy part is that it was originally developed as a way to hassle people. It was a way to create a curse or to harrow people, but it can actually be used for a lot of different applications. Like, I've used this to help a sick friend of mine by choosing some really nice, very soothing things that I personally associated with healing that I knew that they did too. And I played it in the background underneath some music while they were kind of just hanging around at my house trying to get better. And it does good things. It's like, it was originally developed as offensive tech, but it doesn't have to be.
Absolutely.
Let's see.
So
I had some. Go ahead.
Fish, did you want to like formally kind of introduce Dave? I know like we're like into the recording, but
you can cut things and move them, yeah?
Yeah, I can cut things and move them, and honestly, I mean, we could do like an intro because we had a really good conversation, like really opening this up. And kind of I realized kind of what we've been talking about here naturally, sort of like the evolution and the history of chaos magic, which is something that we haven't really gotten into before in any previous chaos magic episodes, which I find pretty neat.
Honestly, like, having Dave on the podcast is the best way to have a touch of the history there. Like, Dave has been around for a long time. Dave has done his research. He does a great he has a great way of introducing chaos magic and the history of it in the first couple of chapters of Quantum Sorcery. Like, it's a big deal. Some of the stuff I had no idea about, and I've been around for quite a while myself. So it's a big deal that he's on the show. I don't.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've actually there's been a couple of episodes where I was listening. It's like, hey, I just got a shout out. That's awesome.
Yeah, I want more people to read your work. I really do.
I
feel
think
like it's a very natural paradigm to follow.
I think Fish might have dropped your name like the first time we had her on the podcast. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly.
like the thing is, like, it seems like the best books out there do not get as much press as they deserve. They really don't. Like, there's a dozen 101 manuals on chaos magic, and they're so widely known, they're so widespread, they go through Llewellyn or whatever, and that means that the books that really matter don't. And this is why I shout them out, like, as much as I possibly can. Like, not only is it an excellent book with excellent content, it's also written like a living thesis, which is something I adore about it. Like, it's clean, it has footnotes, it has a bibliography, you cite your sources. Thank you.
Oh, certainly. That was something that Taylor Elwood suggested, that, although it was, intended to be a practical handbook on a paradigm of sorcery, but I approach it from an academic standpoint, since I was putting so much information, about, quantum mechanics and neurophysiology and psychology in there, that in order to maintain some respectability, I should cite my sources. And I absolutely, I approach that with an openness, and it turned out really well. One of the reviews that I've had on Quantum Sorcery, someone said that if there were an actual school of witchcraft and wizardry, this would be one of the advanced textbooks. And I was like, okay, I'm down with that. I like that.
You're right.
I can definitely agree with that. So I have not read all of Quantum Sorcery, because I think it was just like maybe a week or two ago we were like, yeah, we're gonna have Dave on. So I did not have a chance to read all of it yet, but I'm up to like chapter 4 or 5. And so far, like, I would definitely say, like, for me, like, the science-y physics part of it is hard for me to grasp because I'm not kind of like a science brain person. But you could present it in such like a very plain and kind of like easy to grasp kind of way, that makes it feel like a textbook but not a textbook. But yeah, I do agree that it would definitely be an upper level kind of book if there was an actual magic school.
I've always been interested in physics. I came down to the very last moment in deciding my major in college between physics and physical geography. And I did end up going with physical geography, but I never lost my love of physics. I try to stay abreast of physics news. I read a lot of the popular press books. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, Brian Greene, Lawrence Krauss, and every now and then I will go look on the archive preprint site and look for interesting things going on in there. And, I ended up citing a lot of papers that I found on the archive, just because the information was, I was so pleased that information is more freely available than it was, say, 20 years ago.
And that's one of the things that we really benefit from as magicians and, folks that study the esoteric in, 2020, 2022. Like, we have so much more access to resources than we used to. We've got archive.org, we've got ResearchGate. You can just email the people that wrote these papers and ask for them, and they will very frequently give them to you. Like, it's wonderful. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out about about Quantum Sorcery is that it's a living thesis. You've just published version 3.
Yeah. The science changes.
It does.
So it felt like it was a good time to update. There's been a lot of discoveries. I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years, with the Webb telescope, and they're finding newer and scarcer particles. I just read a article today that researchers in the UK have advanced fusion research by another leap in terms of the amount of energy they were able to produce. So, science never stops moving. We never stop learning more about the nature of the universe around us.
We don't. I mean, Moore's law still applies to so many other things than just computing and technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it will grow exponentially. It will continue to. So we do live in really fascinating times. We do. We know so much more about reality now than we did even 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah. The question that, sitting in my hotel room in Chicago that night, I actually still have the paper where I just wrote, how does magic work? And circled it. Because I'd been practicing magic since I was 14, but I'd never given a thought to, within the phenomenal universe and the laws of physics that we understand and have cataloged, how could magic work in that framework? And I had been, thinking of the different models of magical practice. I'd been in the spirit model for a long time, and then I kind of bailed hard out of it into kind of a hybrid information mind model. And I was looking for a way, at that time, my practice, I had really given up working with any spirits or deities other than just trying to find a way to interface with the universe itself. And that was kind of the seed behind this more materialist angle on magic. I say in the book, there may be many gods, many spirits. I have prayed to them, I have invoked them, I have evoked them, I have worked with them. But I came to a point where I realized that just to do magic, all I needed was my mind and some way to get intent out into the universe. And so I started reading, started researching. I spent several years just looking for answers. And, I wrote that original essay on quantum sorcery in January 2005. And somebody appointed a acquisitions editor, not at Llewellyn, but at Weiser at the time. And he wrote me and said, "Hey, we'd like to publish that if you've got a full-length manuscript of that." I didn't at the time, so I spent pretty much the entire year of 2005 writing the book. And at the end, I sent it in, and someone else wrote back and said, "Well, he's not with us anymore, and we don't think we can use this, but keep us in mind if you've got something else."
What? That is such shit.
Yeah.
Yo.
So I complained
Weiser.
about that. Yeah. On T5A, and Dead Jellyfish is like, "Well, I'm starting a publishing company. I'd love to have you." And I, along with several other writers on that board, Soror Kilaidi and a few others, he published our books. And unfortunately, we never saw anything from it, and he kind of fell off the face of the earth.
Damn.
So 2 strikes. And I was considering self-publishing, and this was back in the LiveJournal days.
Oh,
and
boy.
I made a LiveJournal post about thinking about self-publishing a second edition because I wanted to keep it alive. And out of nowhere, Taylor Elwood said, "Well, I'm acquisitions editor for Megalithica." I'd met him at Ancient Ways, and we had chatted. I had attended his workshop, and a few of us ended up eating dinner together in the cafe there at the hotel. And he said, "Here's my phone number. Give me a call if you'd be interested in placing your work with us." And I called him 5 minutes later, and 10 minutes later, the contract was in the mail.
Oh my God.
That's wild.
Speaking of the LiveJournal days, I seem to remember a post like that, and if this is you that I'm remembering, you probably got a deluge of people going, "Do not self-publish, do not do it, don't fucking do it." I was one of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I definitely did. I got a lot of people saying, "Don't do that."
Fucking do it. Because back then, like in the mid-2000s, self-publishing was essentially a death sentence. You couldn't really get the kind of press that you needed without at least having a little bit of funding to push at advertising and pushing the book and getting it spread out. Like nowadays, self-publishing is way easier to do, which is why we have this huge plethora and this big boom of chaos magic books out there. A lot of folks are going through Kindle or print on demand services, but back then it was not like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't say this often, and it's, even to like the inner circle people and with the podcast and all, but I in my pipe dreams of which is Betwixt, I would love to have like to also publish, to be a publisher of occult books. So maybe one day, Dave, you but I know that's like far off in the future, but it is a goal of mine. So someone hold me to that. And if I don't know, Fish, because you're really into like writing and everything like that too, right?
I'm a working author, yes.
Yeah, so there you go. So I don't know. Maybe we could put our heads together for something like that in the future. That could be fun.
Yeah. Like show up in your house in the middle of the night, hey Jay.
Hey, we're doing the thing
now. A couple of
now.
years ago, you said we were going to do this, and I haven't heard from you.
And I'll be like,
so it's
cool.
it's either you come up with an idea or I take your toes. So yeah.
Hold me to it.
Publishing bully. So, voidworking seems like it's a really natural segue from quantum sorcery, and voidworking is one that I've read before, but it's a book that has a lot of rereadability because, much like quantum sorcery, there are things that you're going to prioritize as you read it on a cognitive level, and then when you go back and read through it again, like say in a year or so, other things stand out that didn't before. So I know that there's a lot that I've missed about voidworking, and I'd like to hear I'd like to hear your explanation of how you went from quantum sorcery to voidworking and how the two interact.
Certainly, there's a banishing. It's actually there's slightly different versions of it in both of the books, and I simply call it claiming a space, and it's just starts out by my will I cleave the dimensions. I claim this space from the void. And it gets more elaborate or less elaborate from there, depending on the circumstance. But one evening when I was using it, opening a ritual, it just struck me that what does that mean? I claim this space from the void. Well, what is the void? And that was a rabbit hole. That was a big rabbit hole. Started again deep diving research. Not even with the idea of making a book out of it at the time, just kind of to see if there were directions that I could take my own magical practice in that could be informed by the void or use the void as a concept. And the more that I read, and the void it's perceived in different ways. Some people perceive it very negatively, like it is Crowley's abyss. But it is also, the unmoved waters of pre-creation in countless myths. It is, the Janunga gap. It is that which has not yet been organized by some intelligent force. It is raw, pure existence that predates everything else. And usually in the mythology, you have some god or monster or group of gods or goddesses that take and order this primordial matter and create the realms of the gods and the realms of man. But it doesn't take a god to do that. A magician can do that. Because the void still exists. It hasn't gone anywhere. It exists outside of time. Everything that is in the universe is still floating in the void. So I started to think of that as a source of power, as a state to which things could be banished and consigned and imprisoned, or something that I could invoke into myself to gain a sense of serenity, calmness, and focus, preparing for other workings. And I do flotation tank, and I have found that I refine some of the meditation techniques while floating in the tank, in absolute silence, absolute darkness, weightless, and it leads to some intensely powerful states of mind.
Never have thought to use a float tank for that, but holy shit.
I've always wanted to try one of those.
Yeah, I've never been able to. Sadly, they're very expensive out here, but they're great for facilitating altered states of minds for natural or non-chemical means.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. But at the time I was also playing some Destiny, where the Void
Great game.
features prominently, and I kept running into things. I'm like, hey, there's some real tech hinted at here.
Yes.
Varger, I was really just holding off on talking about Destiny because it's a really big synchronicity that in 2 weeks we get like Void 3.0 because they're reworking that element, and then you're coming in here talking about it and saying Void on it, so I can't not mention how tight that is.
But one of the envisionings of the Void that I really like is from Clive Barker's book Imagica. He has the idea of this state of being or place, sort of like the astral plane, but called the in ovo, and that is the realm of unrealized dreams, unfinished thoughts, not quite created things. And the maestros in that book, the magicians, they're capable of calling emanations forth. You need a monster, go grab some proto thing from the void, drag it into this world, and flesh it out to do your will. It's like, oh, okay, that actually works. Clive Barker's got some tech in his stuff too.
That's neat. You just like reach into the void. It's like a junkyard, like at your disposal, or like a thrift store.
Yeah.
It's sort of in between the ephemeral world. Like, so in Kabbalism, you have 4 different worlds. One of those is the world of ideas, sort of. It's it's essentially the world of unfinished or incomplete ideas, or you're thinking about stuff. And it's an interesting parallel, sort of in between that and the notion of primal entropy as it is, and where entropy might exist. Like, not the negative energy plane kind of stuff, like we're not talking D&D here, but it all kind of resonates in some of the same ways. It's fascinating to me, and it seems like it's in reaching for those primal forces seems like it's a very natural thing considering the work that you've done prior.
Yeah, it just kind of one flowed into the other. And I say that quantum sorcery can either be a paradigm of its own or a kind of a meta paradigm in which you can couch other systems. It can be kind of bolted on at whatever level you want to work with it at. And my base assumption is still that magical effects happen in the phenomenal world as a result of the mind and the universe engaging with one another. But within that regard, voidworking is kind of another bolt-on paradigm. It's a set of exercises, a set of meditations, a symbol set. I mean, one of the definitions of sorcery that I like best was Hakim Bey's from TAZ, the Temporary Autonomous Zone, where he discusses the fact that sorcery is the manipulation of symbols, and people are themselves symbols as well. So it's another set of tools through which to focus the attempt to work with the universe to bring about what you want to happen, I guess.
God, Hakim Bey is not someone I have heard mentioned in a long, long ass time. And honestly, it's interesting because Hakim Bey styled himself as an ontological terrorist. And when you say words like that nowadays, people freak the fuck out. But back in the days of the Z Cluster in the late 90s, early 2000s, Hakim Bey was one of the books that everybody was pushed to read. And it was a mind blow. Especially having like my beginnings are in ceremonial magic. Whether it was like the Black Brick or my mom's old OTO books or something. like it cracked my head the fuck open. And I wish that we could find a way to bring Hakim Bey's work, specifically Temporary Autonomous Zone, to like latter day chaos magicians, and they could see that so much of what they do is purely symbolic.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sorcery reading list that I was asked to put together to help introduce somebody who was familiar with magic, but really didn't have a grasp of what sorcery is. And I put together a sorcery and chaos magic reading list, and Taz is the second thing on the list. The only thing before that is Peter Carroll's essay, Principia Chaotica. That's the first thing that I always tell somebody to read. And Understanding Chaos Magic by Jack Hawkins is the third.
Do you still have that list?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you be willing to share that list with us?
Sure, yeah. It's over on my Spike. A lot of my writing. Site? It's on spikevision.org.
Okay. I'll grab it from there.
It's just the... What is it? Vargar 23's Sorcery and Chaos Magic Reading List.
Oh, yeah.
And it's curated. I mean, I won't put something on there that I haven't read. And I say that, there may be lots of other great sources out there that I've just never come across. And, this list is also a living list. I recently read Chaotopia by Dave Lee for the first time. And that went right on the list. But it's kind of in a order of, okay, so you just walked in the door and are interested in chaos magic and Western sorcery, and then it goes from there. And it's kind of in a suggested read order. Both of my books are on it.
Of course. Honestly, they need to be.
Gotta get yourself in there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and if we're talking about chaos magic, we have a problem with young chaotes where they don't seem to understand the difference between theurgy and thaumaturgy. Theurgy being God working with deities, working with pseudo-religious or religious paradigms in a worshipful sense in order to achieve the change you want, versus thaumaturgy, which is wonder working, miracle working, where you lean into yourself. And there's not a great understanding of the divide between the two, or the importance of knowing that divide.
Also, they're not mutually exclusive either. Like, you can totally do both.
You absolutely can. But the majority of what we do as chaos magicians in general is results oriented. And it has its roots in thaumaturgy. It has its roots in working wonder as opposed to working with gods. And I keep leaning back to a quote by Hakim Bey, which is, turn to yourselves rather than to your gods or your idols. Find what hides in yourselves and bring it to the light. Show yourselves. Like, that was a thing. And it's been a big part of the chaos magic movement for a long time. Like, the notion of the paradigm shift, wherein you do lean into a worshipful paradigm or a theurgic paradigm at some point for a purpose, that is temporary. And you will shift away from it past a certain point. Like, so as much as you can do both, you can be a thaumaturgist, you can be a theurgist, you can jump from one to the other. The chaos magic movement itself has its roots in thaumaturgy as opposed to theurgy. And it's important to know the difference.
I really like that you made that distinction, Fish, because, like I said before, like, I come from like a Wiccan background, and of course a lot of that is very worship focused. You have your gods that you work with, and I've just realized, like, as I started to study magic more, I also have this tendency, just with anything that I really get interested in, I have this tendency to just, like, pick it apart and break it apart further and break it apart further. And, well, what about this? Well, where does this go? Kind of like how you were saying, Dave. Well, how does magic work? Like, I've asked myself that same question. And I just find it, really interesting. Like, for me, like, you guys are talking about, like, you guys have been in the, the chaos magic currents a lot longer than I have. Really, my introduction to it is now. Like, this is... you're kind of getting like a live view of that, because like really I didn't know much about it or didn't pursue much about it until until I met Sophia by playing Destiny, which is oddly enough which is pretty funny. But
It's a perfect paradox, man. It's all
Yeah.
coming around with one great circle.
Yeah.
And honestly, like the differentiation and the definitions of theurgy and thaumaturgy are things that Dave highlights in Quantum Sorcery. Like, and it's the most concise explanation I've ever fucking seen for it. So, like, it all goes back to this. Like, the delineation between the two is something that I had been aware of, but I hadn't seen written in exactly the way that he did. And it became far more important at that point. Because like I'd seen conversations about it up until that point. Like, and I'd been part of the chaos magic movement since the late 90s. And like, I'd read the staples. I'd read Peter Carroll. I'd read Phil Hine. I'd read Jack Hawkins. I'd read a number of authors. And I'd also, like, because I was coming from a literary background, I'd read, William Burroughs. I read some work by Kenneth Grant, who Kenneth Grant was the one who received Spar's notes, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah,
like,
that's
Spar
yeah.
left his
He
notes.
published. Yeah, he published a book about his work, and that's how Peter Carroll found it.
But to say, if y'all want some real OGs, look up Kenneth Grant's work.
Oh yeah.
Real OGs. But it was the first time that I had seen it laid out in a concise way that was not. And one of the things I love about Dave's work, and one of the reasons I pushed to have him on the show, Dave is the most down to earth magician, especially chaos magician. He's the most down to earth chaos magician I have ever met in my life. Like, he is not up his own ass in any way, shape, or form. Like, he is not here to sell you his cult. He is not here to sell you his product. He is here to explain his thesis to you, and whether you take it or not is your own thing. But it's a beautifully spun thesis, and it works. It works very, very well with what we do.
That's why he's on this fucking show, because he doesn't peddle shit, and that's the kind of people we want to hang around here. Only the coolest people.
Fucking thank you.
Also, like, he was just casually hanging around the VKMU Discord, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, Parker." He's like, "Hey, what's up?" And I remember, like, the first time we talked, we didn't even really talk about magic. You and I talked about sword fighting, because you did HEMA as well. So, and you were telling me about, like, doing the Pennsic battle, and I know what that is. So I'm like freaking shit out, and I'm like, "Oh my god," because like a lot of people talk like they know how to fucking do the sword, but if you're showing up at Pennsic, you ain't talking it, you're doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I started fighting SCA heavy combat when I was 18. I fought until I was 31. That's when I got my wrist busted up, and I was just never able to get back to the same level. And that was a blast. I've got a nice collection of concussions and broken bones to indicate that my helmet was not quite up to par, nor were my gauntlets, but I still had fun.
SCA was pretty hardcore like that. Like, did you ever do Amp Guard, or were you just SCA?
I did Amp Guard a couple of times. There were some LARPers that were trying to put together a game. Some of them came from Amp Guard. Some of them came from Dagger here and some of the other organizations. So it was kind of a mixed bag LARP group. But I do know some of the Amp Guarders. Good folks.
I always found SCA to be far more serious about what they did. No, I only had a little brief period of contact with them, and that was in Texas of all places. So.
That shit is crazy. Like, I did a LARP, but it was just like foam, like foam swords and stuff, and you weren't allowed to hit hard, but like those SCA guys are, man, they're nuts.
They are hardcore. They are made of wood compared to anybody from Amgard. They are made of wood.
We had a couple of them, like a couple of people in the LARP that I was doing, they did SCA stuff. And, like, when they'd be fighting, you'd be like, yo, dude, you gotta chill for a sec. Like, I'm not on your level.
Like, I'm getting beat to death with a rattan stick here. Shit.
Yeah.
It's like, if SCA is basically, like, medieval Fight Club. Whereas, Amtgard is more, is more into the LARPy side of things.
The Fight Club you can talk about.
Yeah.
I did want to note here that we're coming up on, like, almost an hour for our discussion. Okay. So I was just curious, are there any other particular topics that we wanted to kind of cover, or like any kind of concluding thoughts and something like that that we wanted to kind of wrap up the ending parts of the episode on?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember who wrote it. I saw it the other day on some social media somewhere. It said, it was Lon Milo Duquette. Trying to get rich by writing books on magic is not the way to go.
He gets a lot of shit, but honestly, he's not wrong about that.
No, I really like his writing. I'm reading his book Low Magic right now, and I like the way that he teaches or develops his ideas through the vignettes that he writes.
Mm-hmm.
Just writing stories, encounters, circumstances, and then showing, and what this demonstrated was blah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Like Low Magic was a really good one. I'll always shout out Chicken Kabbalah of Rabbi Lamed Ben Clifford.
Oh my god, I fucking love that book. I
That's a
lent it to a
hysterical
friend and
book.
forgot to get it back. Like, it's one of the few books that like really makes you like gut laugh while you're learning like actual Kabbalistic theory.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what Duquette is most known for. Like he injects a lot of humor into his tellings, and he's very down to earth. And I know a lot of Kabbalists that absolutely despise his work, but honestly,
Mm-hmm.
like if you're trying to get the basics down, it doesn't really. You don't have to go through a traditional or formalized path. You just have to get the bare gist of it, and then you can fill in the details later. Like that's a great use of that. And Low Magic was an amazing book. It really was.
It's kind of like.
It's one reason I didn't put a lot of fully developed magical exercises in quantum sorcery. The idea is, okay, here's a paradigm. I mean, okay, here are some examples. Here are some of the kind of things that it can be used with for folks who haven't reached the point where they've developed their own system yet. But, the target for that level of work was, someone who has an awareness of magic, has worked with it, is looking to kind of understand it. But I didn't want to put, it's not a cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of those out there.
But we don't need more of those. We don't need 101 books either. We need
Yes.
advanced paradigmal work. We need advanced theory that can help push our work forward.
And I really want to see like more occultists, and maybe they do in places that I'm not aware of quite at the moment. Maybe what it is. Probably in the chaos magic community they do this more, but it's like like writing papers, theories, and like sharing them, and like commenting on people's shit. Like you guys see a lot of that in.
Yeah, people used to write treatises back in the day, and it was really common for people who had more of an academic background to sit down and write like a whole treatise. Another person who I'd love to have on here is another author who's really unrecognized, Alice E. Rose in DKMU. Like he used to write treatises and dissertation level shit all the time, and just kind of like dump it on the Facebook group and leave it for people to see what they would see, So like,
I wish
yeah,
I saw.
there's people who do that stuff, but it because it requires so much foundational knowledge, it tends to like either A, get lost among the mass of stuff that's more pretty, or B, the amount of attention it requires to go over it tends to put people off, especially if you're ADHD, or if you're someone who like when you're learning magic like I do, I can go at stuff a really slow pace because I like to make sure I absorb a section before moving on. Because it's one thing to like read the words and have it go into your head.
Yeah.
It's another to like truly absorb it and like sit and think about it, to grok it and like internalize it, right? And like I take books a lot slower, but I can retain the information better when I'm doing that, otherwise it just kind of like flies by like you're driving in a car and looking at scenery going,
Yeah.
This is why note taking is so important for when you're reading. Like note taking is a thing. And it's interesting how note taking works on a neurological level.
I used to never note take. And
like
I do
note taking
now.
and marginalia are incredible tools, because what you're doing is you're not just like recording word for word what's going on. You're reading a concept, you are translating it into your own words, and then you are writing it out in your own words. That forces that information to travel between different parts of your brain, and you are more likely to commit it to long-term memory as a result.
Also, it's a whole ass like thing tied into magic, because a lot of magic is like it's spoken word, sure, but like A lot of it comes down to like what you're doing with your hands and what you're crafting and what you're writing out. And one of my favorite techniques I learned a long time ago by accident, I found that when I took a piece of paper, when I was going out on adventures and looking for stuff and wrote down the name of something that I wanted, it would come to me so much easier if I carried a physical piece of paper on me with that note on it, right? And like I even tried it with something that was non-physical and it worked, and it scared the shit out of me when it happened actually.
That is pretty rad. I'll have to try that.
Cast your intent out into the universe, and let it do its thing.
Done deliberately. It's far different than just writing a shopping list, but still similar,
All right, y'all. Is it time to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. So any concluding statements from anyone? Anyone want to kind of?
I just wanted to say that when we're talking about how there's a lot of 101 books, I'm all for more books in general if they're quality books.
Yes.
I've read some phenomenal works that really expanded my ideas of magic, what it is, where it came from, how it works. And I've also read some tabloid trash. But, part of why I wanted to write a book, once I got over the initial terror of the idea, if I can't write a book, I don't know enough to write a book. No one would read a book if I wrote a book. And after I got talked off that ledge, we're all contributing to the Western corpus of magic. That's one of the reasons why when I'm doing, I'm currently working through the first wheel of DKMU egregores. That's why I'm recording my evocations, and I am, going to put out all of the written evocations once I get done with the wheel, because I want to help contribute to further the work with those egregores. I want to help further the cause of developing these entities and how we can relate with them. So, and I've got a video on my YouTube channel which contains all of 2 videos. Was advice for new occult writers, and one of the things I say is, write what you know. Don't just speculate wildly, because if you put it on paper with your name on it, somebody's going to go do the things that you write about. I'm not going to name a name, but there's a well-known occult author who just went through a storm of having their content removed from various websites because of the implications of what they wrote. It was reckless.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And they don't appear to give even a single fuck about what was done with their work.
I'm going to ask for the dirty details on that later.
But, I need to look up what in particular they were writing about. I'm very
curious. That's exactly what I thought it was.
I'll give you the rundown.
Okay.
But we're all contributing to the collective body of work of Western magic. So there is a level of responsibility to make sure that you're putting good material out. That's kind of the standpoint that I've got.
That's a healthy standpoint to have. It really is, especially when we're looking down the barrel of what we are.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you kind of ended on that, because just even with the podcast here, you know what I mean? Like, I always like to make sure we fact check ourselves and make sure we're always just, we're giving quality information, because I realize, people will listen to stuff that we say and they'll do it. They'll try it because, we're presenting ourselves as, I hate to say, like an authority or some sort of like we know shit, but like we know some shit, and that's why we have a podcast. So
yeah. Exactly. It's like there's old guard, there's young blood, there's people who have done the work, there's people who mock those who have done the work. There's all different levels of experience. I'm a big fan of the idea of, we have seen farther because we have stood on the shoulders of giants.
And thank you.
And
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
So-
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, it
Alrighty.
was a pleasure having you on. I would love to
Awesome.
have you again once
Oh,
I've
yeah.
had time to go through all of your material, because I really only got to get like 20 pages in, and that doesn't do it fucking justice.
You're a fucking delight, Dave. I'm really
thank
glad
you.
we got you on the show.
You know, I
was
would
glad to
love
be
to
here.
have you and Evo
Mhm.
on the show together. You remind me. You. I feel like you and Evo
Oh, that'd be
Dominguez
cool.
would
Evo
drive
Dominguez
pretty
is
well.
pretty rad. Like, I think they
Yeah.
would, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's aware of like DKMU and shit. Like he knows all about you guys.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's pretty.
Yeah,
tough.
he like name dropped not just Alice, but like other egregores
Yeah.
in the wheel that showed that he really had like looked into the material.
And,
I was like, all right, I see that.
We
Thank
weren't
you.
on video, but I saw Sophia's eyes bulge out of her head, even though we weren't
Oh,
on
you
video.
could hear my expression without even words being said.
But yes, Dave, as all, it was really a pleasure, and I really would love to have you back on to talk about a whole hell of a lot more stuff for sure.
Sounds like fun.
All right. With that, we are gonna wrap up this one. Dave, we will have you back for sure. I don't doubt it, and we will see you all in the next one.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.